Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Here we go, as May ushers into our consciousness. Before you know it, it'll be Memorial Day. So enjoy this day, this moment, because time will really start to tick fast here, which is what you're going to get as you're going to hear fast-paced, fast-talking on all that's going on in sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first-timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And as we turn the calendar, April now done, May, we have the Kentucky Derby this coming Saturday, which I will spend a couple of minutes on at the back end of the podcast. We also have a PGA, which is later on in the month, the Indianapolis 500. What? JAYREELZ, Indy 500? You're going to start talking about auto racing? Well, those are some of the sports that we could discuss here as we get into this month before we get to the unofficial beginning of summer, which is what? 3 weeks from this coming Monday, I believe. So fasten your seatbelts, no pun intended with the auto racing analogy. But for right now, the NBA and NHL looking to close out their first round series. And it's starting to get a little juicy around here, especially in these parts when it comes to the New York team. And I'll get to them a little bit later on, but I want to recap what happened last night as we had one series close out, no surprise there, and another one that was going to be pushed to a sixth game, but a shocker indeed. And I'll begin with what happened in LA between the Clippers and Mavericks. Remember, they had that mano-a-mano showdown, James Harden versus Kyrie Irving down the stretch of that game 4, which I guess for the Clippers was a classic because they had a 31-point lead, and then the Mavericks came all the way back to take a lead late before Paul George hit that three in the corner. And then after an and-one and a foul for James Harden, salted the game away for them to tie the series to get back to LA. And even with the home court, thinking that LA would probably have a good shot, without Kawhi Leonard, of course, but have a good shot to see if they could go to Dallas up 3-2 and close out the series there. Although we figured that this was going to be a 7-game series, and I picked the Mavericks to win in 7. But what you saw last night was a head-scratcher, was one that will certainly make you just wonder whether or not the Clippers could get out of their own way, whether it's their health. Obviously, with Kawhi Leonard, we saw him hobbling there in games 2 and 3, and therefore haven't seen him since. Will he even attempt to push it in a game 6, do or die for them tomorrow night in Dallas? That we'll have to wait and see. If you ask me, the chances of that will be slim and none, considering his history. But just like what we saw in game 4, where it surprised a lot of people, where James Harden, as I mentioned, down the stretch, making floaters, bank shots, etc. 13 points in that fourth quarter to get the Clippers back in the series. And what do you see last night? And I get it, this is low-hanging fruit. 2 for 12, I believe it was 1 for 7 from 3, and was just awful in the game. And I got to shout out my guy, Gerald Brown, who I'm sure if you have SiriusXM, NBA Radio, Bottom Line Sports Show, I'm giving him a little plug here. Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., he posted on his social media how, for those who thought James Harden coming to LA was not going to be a big deal, look at what he did there in game 4. But Gerald, you've watched sports. You're my age. You've seen James Harden in a big spot. And what happened there last night at home? Nowhere to be found. So the deeper the series gets, the more he becomes that Homer Simpson meme where he just goes right back into the bushes. That is James Harden in a nutshell when it comes to him being a clutch player. He may do that early on in a series, games 1, games 4. As you saw, he scored 28 points in game 1, but where was he in game 5? And now we're going to have to wonder whether or not he's going to even show up for game 6. So that's going to be thrilling to say the least, whether or not he's going to be able to pull a rabbit out of his hat, because we've seen him shrink in these big moments. But more so for Dallas, because for them to put up a 123-93 victory on the road, and for Luka, and how about a guy who's also been hobbling with injuries with his knee, and for him to even say in the postgame to Kyrie that I need to show up, I need to help him out. He's been the guy that's carried us. And this is Luka, who is an annual or perennial MVP candidate to even call himself out and say that he needs to do more. And what he did there last night was almost put up another triple-double for him, as the Mavericks now have to seal the deal. To me, although they can win a Game 7 in LA, it wouldn't be a shock. They've already won 2 games in LA as it is in this series. But if you want to really take the Mavericks seriously, and considering that the team that's in waiting, the Oklahoma City Thunder, they had their feet up after sweeping the New Orleans Pelicans, this to me would be, I would think, a statement game. Because if they won a Game 7 on the road, and we've seen them do that in the past, even without Kyrie, whether it was Game 7 in Phoenix, as we saw 2 years ago in the conference semis, that's when Luka eviscerated CP3, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, etc. But I would think if they were to win this game at home, and I understand people say, JAYREELZ, a statement game if they win at home. Well, do you want them to go on the road to win a Game 7 and that be the statement game? To me, the statement game was last night, but to really, as we all know, when we've watched sports, you want to follow up a 30-point performance, a victory on the road with a win at home. Doesn't matter how you do it. You can win by 1 or win by 100. But to me, if Dallas is going to be serious in this postseason, win that game, because they'll have a couple of days rest from Friday. I'm sure, who knows with the schedule makers, would they even start the Mavericks and Thunder on a Sunday at, let's say, 8 o'clock? Because they can't put them at 3:30. That would be unfair to the Mavericks, even if the game is at home and the flight from Dallas to OKC is a hop, skip, and a jump. I would think they should just start Monday. Who knows how the rest of these Game 6s, and I'll get to in a second, whether it would be the Mavericks and Clippers, or even tonight where you have Indiana, Milwaukee, as well as the Knicks and Philly. And of course, you do have a Game 6 tomorrow night where Orlando's going to go to Cleveland, or excuse me, the other way around. Cleveland will go to Orlando, and let's see if they could get a road win, which would be a statement for them considering they've just been lambasted in the 2 games in Orlando in that series. So for the Mavericks, let's see if they could go home and ice this series and not have to deal about getting on a plane to go back to LA to play Game 7 and extend that series. And for LA, who knows? They can't seem to get out of their own way. Paul George and company, from one game to the next, you do not know what you're going to get. And I think this would be imperative, whether or not, and you're not going to see it, can Kawhi Leonard give it a try here? This is your season, your pretty much everything that's on the line here. And granted, this is a first-round series. This isn't a conference final or an NBA final. But if you want to be that team with the veteran leadership that they have, and we understand Kawhi Leonard for all of his prowess in the postseason in the past, more so with the Spurs than with the Clippers, but if he's going to show you anything, which I believe it's not going to happen, let me see him suit up and pull a Willis Reed to maybe even give you 10 minutes. Why not? It would show your owner, who gave you that extension to begin with, because they're going into a new building next year, the Intuit Dome, I believe I said that right, and put all of his chips and all the stock in you to the point where it's like, yes, you're carrying us into a new era, a new building, our own building. We don't have to share the same occupancy as the Lakers, and we all know the Lakers outshine the Clippers even on the Lakers' worst day. And for Kawhi to not give anything, and I understand that on the performance he had last Friday where he was a shell of himself, he was unable to get up and down the court, but considering he's had a week and the team needs him in any way, shape, or form, could you at least give it a go? That we'll have to wait and see. I think that's not going to happen, but that's just to put it in a little bit of perspective for a guy like Kawhi, who's going to lead this franchise into a new arena, new uniforms, new everything, and Ballmer's paying him whatever it is, $150 million. So can you at least lace him up and give us a couple of baskets, maybe? We'll see what happens there, but that's going to be fascinating to see how that is going to play out tomorrow, not only just from the standpoint of the Clippers, whether or not they're going to show up in the game, but can the Mavericks close out the Clippers and not have this series extended to a 7th game? And then last night, what a difference a week makes, because 1 week ago, I was over here just despondent. and thinking that if the Celtics weren't to get out of the series alive, that the coach would be fired. And that would be absolutely 100% true. But of course, we don't have to worry about that as Celtic fans, because ever since that moment where the Heat rained 23 three-pointers in the TD Garden, a record for the franchise, and even though they only won by 10 points, so you would have thought 23 threes, they beat them 125-99. No, that wasn't the case. They only beat them by 10. And since then, pretty much the Miami Heat didn't even have a lead. In fact, they only had a lead for 56 seconds in this series, other than game 2, of course. But for the Celtics to take care of business in the fashion that they did, Monday night, Derek White was unconscious, and he was even unconscious a bit last night. Career high 38 points in game number 4, and then last night 25 points where he was 5 for 10 from 3. Jaylen Brown also had 25 points. They did what they had to do. They took the Heat to the back of the woodshed, and I understand no Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. They didn't even have the rookie Jaime Jaquez last night, but it didn't matter. You could have brought D. Wade back and Chris Bosh, and they probably wouldn't have had a shot to beat the Celtics last night as they disposed them in 5. And just like I mentioned at the start of this postseason, how this was going to be a test for them, and I thought that this was going to be the best matchup for them, because if they would have played the Bulls and beat them in, let's say, in 5 games, it would have been a deal where, all right, they should have beaten the Bulls. Just like they should have beaten the Heat, and rightfully so, but because of the history and because of what happened last year, and after that game 2 last week, put a little bit of doubt, certainly doubt in my mind, because that's a movie I've seen before. And even if the Heat would have gotten 1 game, even if it was the most ugliest throwback to the 90s type of basketball, where game 5 last night would have been a pivotal game, obviously that wasn't the case, but me being a Celtic fan, a little bit cynical and jaded, of course, that was my take a week ago, and now I can at least exhale to the point where, all right, now let's move on. The one thing you have to worry about, though, is Kristaps Porzingis pulled that calf muscle there, similar to what Giannis has, and we'll get to Giannis in a moment. But for the Celtics, they don't have to worry about Kristaps. I would think maybe even to the NBA final, because even if they were to play, let's say, arguably the Knicks in a conference final, I think they'd be okay, even without Porzingis. But as it is, he's probably going to miss the next series. There have been reports that he could probably play in an Eastern Conference final. Does that mean game 1? Is it game 3? Is it game 5? Who knows? But the Celtics can worry about that down the road as they await the winner of Orlando and Cleveland, where, let me just get to that series. Game 6 is tomorrow, where game 5 came down to the wire. Evan Mobley had to block a shot there toward the end to save a victory for the Cavaliers, as that game was tooth and nail. That was pretty close, unlike the first 4 games of the series. Does that mean that are we going to get games that will come down to the wire, the white knuckler, nail biter type of game? I got to see Cleveland really step up here in Orlando tomorrow night, because as you saw in games 3 and 4, they were just no-shows. They were probably somewhere in Universal Studios or maybe in the Magic Kingdom ride in Disney. Who knows? But for the Cavaliers, let me see them. This would be a statement for them, similar to the Mavericks, if they go into Orlando and take care of them, whether they beat them by 10, 20, or even by a bucket. Doesn't matter, because Cleveland, if they go to a Game 7, which will be Sunday, then whomever wins that series, or let's say Cleveland in particular, considering they have home court, their turnaround is going to be quick, because then they're going to have to go to Boston and play game 1 there on Tuesday. So let's see what's going to happen there in the game 6. And then you have 2 game 6s tonight. We'll have to harken back to what happened earlier in the series, where Indiana, Milwaukee, the Bucks showed some toughness. They showed some gumption and some mettle. They didn't roll over. They were down 3-1, as we know, with no Giannis and no Damian Lillard. But they came out strong, fast, loose, and just ran the Pacers out of the gym. So now there's a little bit of pressure on the Pacers, where game is in their building, 6:30 tonight. I don't like the start times of these games. And I understand why they put the Knicks at 9, because that is the sexier matchup. That is now the juicier series out of Indiana, Milwaukee, because you don't know if you're going to get Giannis or Damian Lillard in this game tonight. Although Doc Rivers said that they are close to coming back. Does that mean you're going to get Giannis, Dame, both? Who knows? I guess it's a game time decision. Whether or not, we'll see. And you'll have to watch 6:30. But 7 o'clock should have been Knicks Sixers, and 9:30 should have been Indiana at Milwaukee. Obviously, you have the time zone difference where Milwaukee's in the Central, so they could start at 8:30. Where you're going to start Knicks and Sixers 9 o'clock East Coast? I get it. It's all about ratings. We know that that's going to be more of a magnet of a series to watch based on what we saw there on Tuesday night. And let's get right to it. I'll get to Indiana, Milwaukee in a moment. But for Knicks and Sixers, that was just a wild ending to that game. And people could blame Mitch Robinson. People could blame Josh Hart, and rightfully so. Even though for Maxey to hit that shot after the foul by Robinson, down 6 with, 28 seconds to go. And then for Josh Hart to miss 1 of 2 free throws. And then Tyrese Maxey, as he was dribbling the ball up the court and he took it from the logo. I'm thinking to myself, A, that's a crazy shot. We've never seen range like that from Maxey, although he can hit threes, as you saw. But for him to take that shot and to leave the Knicks a little bit of time left on the clock, you want to take that shot with literally seconds left. And he probably could have taken a couple of more steps before making that attempt. But that one just blew me away from the time it left his hand, thinking, oh my goodness. And in real time, this wasn't second guessing. Real time, I thought, wait a minute, why are you taking that shot now? B, why are you taking that shot from the logo? And then when it hit nothing but net, I was just out of my gourd. Couldn't believe it. And then in the overtime, Joel Embiid, who did not have a good game despite the triple-double, did make a big defensive block there and was hobbling on one leg, as you saw. And then Jalen Brunson, again, first guess in real time, when he threw the ball away as Isaiah Hartenstein went to the basket and he threw it out of bounds. It brought me back to Game 6 in Miami, where he had that late turnover when the Knicks were down by 2 and sealed the game for the Heat at that time. And that was something that has haunted him even coming into this postseason. So could you imagine when he threw the ball away and he rubbed his face thinking, oh, geez, maybe for that one split second, did he hearken back to what happened in Miami, thinking that he just threw the game away? And now they have to get on a bus to go to the Wells Fargo Center for Game 6, thanks to the heroics of Maxey, 46 points, and Embiid just being a warrior in that game. And now that the series will shift to the City of Brotherly Love, what that's going to be like in that building tonight, where the Sixers, their owner, bought up the remaining 2,000 tickets, which is a disgrace because that just is an indictment on the fans of the Sixers. And I don't want to hear it. I know that that's a rabid city when it comes to their teams. Probably the pecking order would be Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, and then maybe Sixers. We understand a hockey fan, they are going to be more dyed-in-the-wool and a little bit more condensed, especially when it comes to hockey. They're not going to be as spread out as the Sixer fan is. But for them to have the owner buy up the remaining seats so the Knick fan can't go on the secondary market or can't make a rush down to Philly to take the Friday off to make it a long weekend to invade that arena to cheer their team on, to what we saw there in Game 4 on Sunday where the Knicks pulled out a 97-92 victory, that is a disgrace. I don't care how you slice it. I'm glad that you may not have a ton of Knick fans there, but I'm sure the Knick fan is still going to flock down there, whether it's secondary market, whether it's scalping, who knows. Those Knick fans, whether they're the 20-year-olds who, I get it, we could pretty much leave them aside because the 20-year-old Knick fan, they don't know Willis Reed if he fell on him, and may he rest in peace. But I'm sure the corporate, the Wall Street guy, they're going to try to get in their limos to go down there to see if they could root their team on to a first-round series victory. So that is going to be fascinating to watch, if you ask me. Indiana, Milwaukee, it all depends on whether or not Giannis or I should say, Damian Lillard come back, where the series is going to be in Indiana. Now that I think about it, I did say Milwaukee. The game is in Indiana, and even though I know the time difference doesn't have a difference here because you do have a scenario where Indiana is in the Eastern time zone, but that game should be at 9:30. Let's face it, but the scheduling is what it is. That is the first game tonight, and I would think Indiana's going to win tonight. if Giannis does come back, that will give him a bigger lift, I think more so than Lillard. So I would think the Pacers, they're going to try to run him out of the gym. That's just my thought on that game. And I think Orlando and Cleveland, that's going to get pushed to a 7th game unless I see otherwise, because based on what Orlando did in games 3 and 4, that's how I'm going to look at it. So that's what you have there in the NBA. And yes, I do have to put a postmortem on the Lakers because the Nuggets, and that was a street fight, a heavyweight fight, I should say, based on what Jamal Crawford, one of the color commentators on the TNT broadcast the other night. But for Jamal Murray, another not so good shooting night. And the Nuggets, you do see some cracks there with them because the Lakers, they should be up 3-2 in the series. They had that 20-point lead in game 2. We saw how that unfolded. And obviously they did win a game number 4 for their first win over the Nuggets in forever. But that was a game that was in the Lakers' grasp. They should have had a chance to win that game. And for them to just have Jamal Murray, you could look at that final sequence where they had a foul to give. And why didn't they foul Murray there before he took that game-winning attempt is beyond me. And Darvin Ham, who knows what his status is going to be moving forward as far as being coach of the Lakers. And it's going to be a long offseason for the Lakers because who knows what's going to happen with LeBron. I would think he's going to stay in LA. Why would he go elsewhere at this stage and then hope for the organization to draft his son, Bronny James? That's if he's going to be. And I understand he declared himself for the draft, but he also left himself open to be a part of the transfer portal if he goes to another school. So we'll have to wait and see on that. The coach, I'm sure they know that between LeBron and AD, and LeBron does have a $51.5 million player option, so he can come back next year. But what other pieces are you going to bring in? Austin Reeves is going to be part of the mix. Hachimura, I don't know if they signed him for longer than a 1-year deal, if he's going to come back next year. But this Laker team isn't going to be that much more improved, and they're going to be a year older. So Rob Pelinka, he's going to really have to work magic to see whether or not that he could piece this team together to be close to a championship squad, because right now they are far from that. So that's number one. And then Denver, you're going to have a monster series with Minnesota as the T-Wolves dispose of the Suns, as we know. But for Denver, there are some cracks there. Not a lot of depth. Yes, you do have Jokic, obviously. Also Jamal Murray, who does not fear of taking that big-time shot as he did it twice in the series against the Lakers. Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., who's really starting to come into his own as a player. Yes, their starting 5 is formidable. KCP, but other than that, the Christian Browns of the world are their guys that, yes, I understand they're part of a championship team, but they do not have the guys like they did last year, whether your name is Jeff Green or even Bruce Brown. So let's see. Denver's going to have a tough road to get to a final when you think about it. And to say that as a defending champ, that's a lot. Because they're going to have to go through Minnesota, who is right now playing as good as they possibly can. Anthony Edwards is a guy that seems to be unstoppable at the moment. And then OKC, they swept their first round as well. They could have them waiting in the wings when it's all said and done before maybe even getting to Boston when it's all said and done. So if they're going to win another championship and go back-to-back, they're going to really earn this. Whereas in the East, look what the Celtics have waiting for them. And that's not a knock on Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Indiana, or even the Knicks for that matter, and Philadelphia, of course. But it's a much easier trip for the Celtics to get to a final than it will be for Denver in the days and weeks to come. So that's what I got there. And one last thing I will say, and I didn't mention this when I talked about the Celtics. I know that this was a big step for the Celtics here in winning the series, learning from it, as I mentioned before, winning in 5. But sometimes when you tease the basketball gods the way Jimmy Butler did, and mind you, Butler didn't even play in the series. And that's not to knock Jimmy Buckets at all. But for him to put out that meme of his face on Jaylen Brown's body, where after game 2 he said, "Don't let us get one." And yeah, they did get their one, but that was it. So hopefully, I don't know if that was any incentive for the Celtics. Probably not. They probably saw it and just brushed it off. But you don't want to tempt the fate of the basketball gods because they could really come back and not only biting ass, but certainly kicking ass in the process. So just wanted to put that out there before I move on. So let's do that. Let me lace up my skates and turn my attention to what's happening on the ice. Yes, I'll give a postmortem to the Islanders at the back end of this because right now, same scenario with the NBA. You do have some Game 6s on the docket. Can we get some Game 7s? Hopefully we'll get some Game 7s in the NBA. I think it would be fascinating. It would be good for the league. Same for the NHL. We saw a lot of 3-1 series leads. We already saw a sweep there with the Rangers beating the Capitals. And now you have a scenario where Colorado just upended the Winnipeg Jets. What's to discuss there? Connor Hellebuck, who's going to be a Vezina Trophy finalist, played anything but like that in this series where he gave up, I believe, off the top of my head, 22 goals in 5 games. Certainly not Vezina Trophy-like. So Colorado is hitting on all cylinders. Let's see if we're going to have a matchup between them and the Dallas Stars, who came all the way back and now has taken a 3-2 series lead over the defending Cup champ Vegas Golden Knights. Jason Robertson, power play goal, second period. Jake Ottinger with 25 saves as they were able to ice the game. No goal scored in the third period and push the Golden Knights to the brink. Let's see if they can come out. Now, mind you, Dallas put themselves in an 0-2 hole at home and now have run the table to see whether or not that they could also have their statement game and win a Game 6 and put the Stars out of their misery. So let's see. I believe that'll be tomorrow night in the National Hockey League. So we'll go through the schedule, of course, in a moment. But good job by the Stars to get all the way back. Let's see if they could get the series clincher there, which would be, yes, tomorrow night, 10 o'clock there on TNT. Then you have the Oilers, who beat the Kings last night. I'm just talking about the games last night. I know Game 6s, there's quite a few of them. But just to put this aside, Oilers crowned the Kings. No surprise there. Leon Draisaitl, 2 goals there last night. And then you had Zach Hyman, who scored his 7th goal in the series. But even with a late goal, in the third period by the Kings, they fell short. And now the Oilers can move on to see if they'll play either Vancouver or Nashville. Now, Vancouver put themselves in a situation where they had to get on a plane to go to Nashville in a Game 6 to let's see if they could push that to a 7th game. Nashville, they were down 1-0 in the third, and then they got 2 goals in the final frame to where they were able to escape with a victory to now go back to Smashville to see if they could somehow, some way push the series back to the Pacific Northwest, especially after that terrible Game 4 loss as we talked about on Monday. So let's see if we could get a 7th game in that series, as well as a 7th game where you're going to have a Game 6 in Toronto tonight, where even though no Austin Matthews, as he's going through that illness there in a Game 5 in Boston a few nights ago, no problem, as they were able to win 2-1. And now let's see if they can win a home game, because Boston did win those 2 games in Toronto, as we saw, and now this is eerily similar to last year if you're a Bruin fan, because remember, you went to Florida last year, tied at 1, you won the 2 games in Florida before coming home, and then losing in overtime, similar to last year, to the Panthers in a Game 5, and now you have to go on the road to see if you can win a Game 6 and close out the Maple Leafs, because the last thing that I would think the Bruins, first and foremost, although they'll brush it off, but the last thing that the fan base in particular, and maybe even the front office to a certain extent, they do not want to see a Game 7 in their building, because that building will be tight as a drum. Their fans are going to be wondering whether or not they're going to get out of the series alive. And granted that they did not have the regular season that they did last year, but this is going to be the same script. Up 3-1, winning 2 games on the road, losing a Game 5 in their building. What's going to happen tonight if Toronto somehow wins a Game 6, and then now you have to deal with a Game 7 in your building for the right to go on to a second round? I would think Toronto, and I hate to say this, I picked them to go to a Cup final. Let's start there, against Edmonton. But something tells me that Boston's going to seal the deal tonight. I would like to see a 7th game. I would like to see Toronto finally beat the Boston Bruins. And I know my cousin JD, who's a diehard Bruin fan, only because they have not beaten the Boston Bruins, I believe, going back to 1959. It is time. Do the math. what is that? 65 years? So for the Maple Leafs, if they want to slay another dragon, just like they had to do last year, winning a first-round series for the first time in 20 years, maybe they could exercise these demons, beating the Bruins for the first time in literally forever, when you think about it. But we'll see. I would think that the Bruins, considering that they've had success there, and just when you think that the Maple Leafs, they show you a glimmer of hope, oh wow, they won an overtime game on the road, and then they come home and what's going to happen? Chances are they may lose. But I would like to see a 7th game. Let's see what's going to happen. But something tells me the Bruins are going to win. And then let's see what's going to happen with Vegas and Dallas. I think that Dallas, you would think that they're going to sweep after losing those first 2 games. I'm going to give Vegas just a little bit of credit here. I could see them winning a game in their building to push it to a 7th game, show some pride, show that they are the defending Cup champs, and not just get swept here along the way in this first round. So that's what you have there. Now, I can't really preview any of the other series. Yes, I could talk Rangers, Carolina, because let's get to it. Carolina gets off to a 2-0 lead in Game 5. 2 goals right out of the bat, but then the Islanders answered back with a goal of their own, and that stemmed the tide a little bit because I thought that when the Islanders trailed 2-0, the next goal was going to be the series, I thought. Because if they're down 3-0, that building is going to be on fire. Their team is going to be raring to go. And as it was, when the Islanders answered back in the fashion that they did, knowing that they had to get that next goal, and obviously they did do so, and the Hurricanes scored those 2 goals right out of the gate, for all intents and purposes. A minute 23 in, and then they had a power play where just 3 minutes and 13 seconds in, it's already 2-0, and you're thinking to yourself, oh geez. But thankfully, the Islanders did get a power play of their own based on a Carolina penalty, and then Mike Riley did get that goal to make it 2-1. Now, even with the goal later on in the period for the Hurricanes to make it 3-1, the Islanders answered back, and this is where I thought maybe, just maybe, the tide would turn, because they did make it 3-2 early in the second on Brock Nelson's goal, and then with just 22 seconds left in the second period, Casey Zizekas got on this score sheet to where they tied the game, and it was 3-3, and then I just thought maybe that goal would propel them to the point where they could maybe get the next goal. Because we know the Islanders squandered third period leads, or just third periods, period. Did I say that right? Yes, maybe third period exclamation point. A little bit redundant, but you get my point. So for the Islanders to think, as bad as they've been in third periods, and all you got to do is look back to Game 2 in the series, I thought now the momentum's on their side, and maybe the Hurricanes will be a little bit tight. Not the case, as Jack Drury gets that goal 4.5 minutes into the third period, and just like you saw in Game 2, when the Islanders squandered that lead, 3-2 lead, and they had the game-tying goal for Carolina, and then 9 seconds later, scored the game-leading goal. What did you get here? 9 seconds later, after the Hurricanes made it 4-3, Stefan Nason, who had a big goal early on in that series, and has had a big series overall, gets pretty much the clincher, if you ask me, because the Islanders, even at 4-3, all right, 9 seconds later, it was 5-3, and that sealed the deal, if you ask me. And then they added an empty netter later, and now the Islanders go off into another offseason with a bunch of question marks as Carolina advances. Carolina Rangers, I think that's going to be an interesting series. Now, the Rangers have the home ice, and the Rangers have a lot more firepower. So right now, I would predict them to win, I'll say 6 games. I won't even say 7. Now, we saw them play in this same round 2 years ago, a 7-game series where Carolina had the home ice. And remember, it was a home ice series for 6 games until the Rangers won a Game 7, I believe, 4-0 in Carolina. So I get it, that was 2 years ago. What does that have to do with today? But I think the Rangers, they're just stronger all the way around. And Carolina, I'm sure they're going to give them a good fight. But to me, you got too much Artemi Panarin, too much Chris Kreider, too much Mika Zibanejad, Vincent Trocheck, a whole list. Go down the list where the Hurricanes can't match that firepower. So that's what you have. If I want to predict the series now, and that's the only one I can predict at this very moment, that I will say Rangers in 6. And as far as the Islanders, all I'm going to say is this. they could play a certain way in a certain system. But you have to have the players. You have to have game-breaking players. And I understand you can't have all-stars at every position. You're not going to have a Cale Makar on defense. You're not going to have a Connor McDavid, as we all know. That's a generational player. You're not going to have 3 solid offensive scoring lines. Understood. But here's the thing. The Islanders have a system which is very good when it's clicking. But you need to have the talent. You need to have the players. But then people can say, well, wait, JAYREELZ, what about Carolina? Carolina doesn't have a superstar talent. Carolina doesn't have, but they have 4 solid lines. And their system, although I think it's going to falter them as they get deep into the postseason, look last year. They got swept by the Panthers, who are a hot team in the conference final, and we talked about what happened the previous year to the Rangers. You need to have firepower. Even the Panthers, they may not be able to match teams like Colorado, Edmonton, even the Rangers for that matter, but they do have a guy who's a proven playoff performer in Carter Verghese. They do have Matthew Tkachuk. They do have Alexander Barkov. They have guys that can put the puck in the net. The Islanders don't have that. All right, they have Brock Nelson, who's a 30-goal scorer. All right, great. Matthew Barzal, he's more of a playmaker than he's a goal scorer. Can he score goals? He can, but that's not his MO. Bo Horvat, another 30-goal scorer, but he's not a guy that when you rank the top goal scorers in the sport, he may not even be in the top 10. He's not in the top 5, that's for sure. Same for Brock Nelson. They need to have either more depth on their roster when it comes to, let's say, a Carolina Hurricane team, or they have to have guys that are just going to be snipers, even the Rangers for a certain extent, where you look at a guy like Artemi Panarin, who they got as a free agent, or Mika Zibanejad, I know he's homegrown, same for Chris Kreider, but still, you need to have either depth or you have to have just scoring prowess. And guess what? The Islanders have neither. And I know their defense is suspect, and their goaltending shaky this year because Ilya Sorokin, he took a notch below his performance last year where he was a top 3 Vezina Trophy finalist for best goalie in the sport. Not the case this year. And Semyon Varlamov, love him and everything, but his time has come. The Islanders have to look elsewhere and get a backup. If you want to sign him as a backup, fine. This juggling of the goalies, either have your guy, be the guy, or that's it. So the Islanders, and they're going to have to work magic. We get it that the Islanders is a far cry from what we once saw during their heyday in the 80s. That's 40 plus years ago. And I'm not trying to say they have to recapture that because that is a different time, generation, etc. when it comes to the hockey and even sports landscape for that matter. But Lou Lamoriello is going to have to do something here. Last offseason, he did 0. The year before that, Alexander Romanov was his one free agent prize. They're going to have to do a lot more than that if they're going to want to compete with the Rangers, with the Bruins, with the Panthers, with the Maple Leafs, with the Hurricanes, etc. And that's not even including the teams out west. So in a big giant nutshell, Lou Lamoriello, you have your work cut out for him. Keep Patrick Roy, that's fine, if he wants to stay. I don't even know if they've extended him to a multi-year contract. Maybe that's going to be in the works over the course of the next few weeks. Keep Roy, I'm fine with that. But you need to have more players and better players here. Because if not, you're going to be at the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff standings year in and year out. And it's going to be a wing and a prayer for you to get back to a conference final, which you did not too long ago. 2020 and 2021. That's where the system worked. And that's where it was fine. But you need the players. Why could you beat Tampa in those back-to-back years? Because you didn't have a Steven Stamkos. And he was hurt for most of that time. You didn't have Braden Point. You didn't have Nikita Kucherov. You didn't have Victor Hedman. You don't have guys like that. Or Andrei Vasilevsky in goal. Those are the guys that are going to take you to the mountaintop and keep you there for some time. Not guys that are just going to, get you a round or two or get you to a conference final, and then that's it. That's your ceiling. The Islanders have already hit their ceiling. Now they have to go above that. So that is your NHL. Let me see what else I got here before I bid adieu. Yes, a couple other things on the docket. Major League Baseball, as I get into the batter's box and take a couple of hacks here. The news of note this week, Mike Trout, I got to start there. It's unfortunate because we know the track record of Mike Trout, the MVPs, top player in the sport, got off to a great start this year. 10 home runs, floundering Angel team. They're now, 10-18. They got off to a decent start for them. And now they're going to be into baseball oblivion because by the time we hit Memorial Day, that's going to be it. And now with him on the shelf, 6 to 8 weeks with a torn meniscus, the Angels are going to be heard from again this year. Which now brings up this question, because when he's healthy, we know he's a top flight player. And even he's 32, 33 years of age, and he still has how many years left on his contract? I believe he has maybe 8 more years. As insane of it to think in that scope. But maybe it's time. If you're Artie Moreno, and let's say when he comes back, he's going to have a good remainder of the year. Well, let's say he puts up big numbers and he's healthy. And that's the big question right there. And the big what if. Being healthy, I understand he wants to stay in Anaheim. I understand that he wants to stay in one organization, which is great because not a lot of players in this day and age wants to do that. But if I'm Artie Moreno, it's not working with him. And I understand you haven't put the right pieces around them, in particular a pitching staff, but whether that was Shohei Ohtani, who overshadowed Mike Trout over the last 5 years with his pitching and MVP prowess, winning 2 of the last 3 MVPs in the American League, and Anthony Rendon, which that has been an unmitigated disaster of a signing, and not having the pitching that you need in order to win in the sport, it's time to trade him. Now, what are you going to get back? You're probably going to get 50 cents on the dollar because A, you're probably going to have to eat up half of that contract. B, I guess the more you eat up, the more you're going to get back in return. But even then, what are you going to get back? He's going to be an aging superstar who could still perform, but he's going to have to go to a team that is going to be ready to win. He's not going to go to a team that's on the come up and can win. He's going to have to go to a ready team or ready-made team in order for him to get to a postseason and maybe do some damage to stake his claim as one of the great players of his generation. Because as we all know, he's already made his name in the regular season, but now he has to make his fame in the playoffs. Postseason, just to rhyme Walt Frazier, as he said many moons ago. So I only bring this up now because as a baseball fan, and I'm sure as a guy who's looking at his career and him not playing on winning teams, and even though he wants to stay there, and him being injured, and if your ownership, this is something that you're going to have to really think long and hard, but it's all going to be predicated on whether or not, when he comes back, he can stay healthy and put up big numbers. Because if he's going to be in and out of the lineup for the rest of the year, there's no way you're going to trade this guy. You can't. Because then you're going to get 20 cents on the dollar, and you're going to have to eat more of that contract in order to get something back. So just a shame. It really is, because it robs the baseball fan of what we could have possibly seen. And I understand the organization is in shambles. With Artie Moreno, he wanted to sell, then he didn't want to sell. Now he's keeping the team, etc. And only having one postseason performance in 2014, where I believe it was 1 for 14. That one hit was a home run, but he had about 7 strikeouts. And that's all you have when it comes to Mike Trout as far as the back of his baseball card and what he did in the playoffs. And to not be able to see him on that big stage, maybe not year in and year out, but at least throughout the course of his career, only one shot in the postseason. And maybe it's time for their ownership and their front office to say, Mike, we love you. We understand you want to be committed and dedicated to this organization, but we want to trade you somewhere where you could win. Because we know that you're a player that's going to the Hall of Fame. You're a player that is still at the peak of his powers. But guess what? That's going to start to decline here, slowly but surely. If it hasn't been already, based on his health here over the last 4 or 5 years. I would think that'd be the best and brightest move for the Angel organization. However, he has to stay healthy the rest of this year in order for a trade to be consummated in the offseason. Because if not, chances are he's going to be an Angel for life. So that's number one. Number two, the Yanks and Orioles have a big series, low-scoring series when you think about it. Orioles won the first 2 games and won 2-0 on Monday, and then also won 4-2 on Tuesday night before the Yankees shut out the O's last night, and Corbin Burns pitched yesterday. So after the first 2 nights where Grayson Rodriguez and Dean Kramer won those first 2 games for the O's, and then you're thinking now their ace, Corbin Burns, who made the one pitch mistake to Oswaldo Cabrera, who hit the 2-run homer. But besides that, that was all the offense that the Yankees needed in giving the O's a bit of taste of what the Yankees got on Monday night, losing 2-0. And then you have the finale here where, to me, I said this was going to be a series more so for the Orioles than the Yankees. It was in their building, number one. Number two, they want to set the tone to know that a division winner last year, the defending AL East champs, they want to stake their claim to show that, hey, we belong. The big bad Yankees are coming to town. They won the first 2 games. You figured, all right, if they gain the split of the next 2, they'll win 3 out of 4 and put themselves, right now, they have percentage points over the Yankees in the division, but they'll have a 1-game lead if they win this afternoon against Carlos Rodon, who pitched very well in his last start. So Rodon, this is why he got paid $162 million. I get it. It's an early May game. Nobody's going to remember it as you get deeper into the season. But for right this moment, to get the Yankees back into sole possession of first place, put forth a good effort today. But for me, Baltimore, if they win today, nice little statement early on to show winning 3 out of 4 in their building would mean a lot. Where the Yankees, if they come away with a split, no big deal. And even if they lost 3 out of 4, you still say the same thing. Now, if they would have gotten swept, different story, but that's not going to be the case. So let's see if the Orioles could get the series-winning game today to win 3 out of 4, put themselves in first place, or will the Yankees get out of town, come back home with a face the Tigers this weekend with a split, and them getting first place all to themselves once again. And then you had that wild brawl there in Milwaukee the other night between Jose Siri, who hit a home run earlier, and then on a ground out to first base, which looked like it was going to be meaningless, to where the Brewer pitcher not only had some words that was said, but on top of all that, started throwing some punches, got suspended, and that pitcher's name I forgot. I think his name is Uribe, right? Isn't it? So as I'm looking at it up now, yeah, Abner Uribe had that confrontation with Siri, and then Freddie Peralta also got a 5-game suspension as well for his actions in this brawl. Uribe got 6, and Siri got 3 games. So for that to take place, big-time melee, Reese Hoskins trying to get in the middle of it, he gets thrown to the ground. Uribe trying to connect, he swings and misses, same for Siri. Not a pretty sight to behold. And I understand baseball brawls, they're few and far between. You usually get a lot of those brushbacks. That's where the brawls start, not usually on the base paths, and when they do, sometimes a dust-up could turn into something bigger. Usually, if you're going to get a brawl in baseball, it's going to be because of retaliation or some chin music to a batter where the batter's going to charge the mound. But that one was a little bit surprising, and even though Siri did get drilled on a 3-0 pitch as well in the game, but for Tampa and Milwaukee, since then, no fireworks, and obviously the suspensions that were handed down. Even the manager of the Brewers, Pat Murphy, I believe also got 3 games for his involvement in this brawl. But that was one that really was, I don't want to say ugly. When you say ugly, that's when you're going to see some blood and really see some fisco. I think back to last year with Tim Anderson and Jose Ramirez when Anderson was on the White Sox and dropped his glove and they squared off and Ramirez caught him with a right. That was not pretty for Anderson and for the White Sox, but obviously you don't want to see that. But sometimes baseball, you're going to have tempers flare, and in a situation like that, we saw what happened there in Milwaukee just a couple nights ago. But other than that, baseball, I know that the Twins, they've been streaking here, but it comes with a big, giant caveat. When you look at the standings and you see that record at 17-13 and they've won 10 in a row, you think, whoa, Twins, where did this come from? A team that was 7-13 and now they're 17-13, and in the thick of things here in the early part of May with the Guardians who are in first place and the Royals and Tigers ahead of them in the division. What's going on there in Minnesota? Well, I have to throw cold water on it. Sorry to my guy, Head Style in Minnesota. Pump the brakes because those 10 wins, you ready? 4 last week against the White Sox, 3 over the weekend against the Angels, and 3 this week against the White Sox again. So, yes, although impressive, and I get it that you're only going to play the teams that are in front of you, whether they're the dregs of the sport, a la White Sox, Angels, or even if they were in the thick of things or a contending team, if you beat those teams along the way, great, even better. That would make your 10-game winning streak look a lot more impressive. But, sorry, you got to take that with a grain of salt considering that you beat up a team. And mind you, the White Sox swept the Rays over the weekend, so they came in a little hot for them. And, of course, the Twins cooled them off. So maybe people could say, well, JAYREELZ, hey, the White Sox at least had a 3-game winning streak coming in. But they're still the White Sox. White Sox are what now, 6-28? Or whatever their record is? And you've had that battle of last place go on in Miami where the Marlins have won a couple of games, including that wild one on, Tuesday night, where they were down 5-0 in the 9th inning. And it came all the way back to tie, and they actually should have taken the lead because they had a 5-4 lead, the Rockies. They were down by 1 with the bases loaded and nobody out. And they only got one more run where they had to push it to the extra innings. Rockies did get a run, but then the Marlins got 2 to win 7-6, and then they won yesterday. So who knows? Maybe the Marlins could get a sweep here in an afternoon game, a getaway day game against the Rockies, and we know how pathetic they are. But the Twins, and let's take a look at the weekend schedule. The Twins, let's see who they face off to really punctuate their winning streak. Off today, and Minnesota, they may be at home here. Yeah, they play the Red Sox. And the Red Sox, that's a good opponent. So let's see if they can continue their 10-game winning streak in the Twin Cities as the Bo Sox come to town. But for today, we talked about Yankees-Orioles. Mets conclude their series with the Cubs, a 4-game series in their own right. Hopefully they can get a split there because for whatever reason, even though they won the other night thanks to DJ Stewart, but they can't seem to score any runs. Even with Luis Severino on Monday night pitching a no-hitter into the 8th inning, but they lose that game 3-1, and they didn't get a run there yesterday. So can the Mets get some runs here as they're going to go up against a guy named Ben Brown? Who? You have, San Francisco, Boston. But let's get to the weekend. Milwaukee, Chicago. Cubs, that is. Baltimore at Cincinnati. San Francisco at Philly. The series of notes, Detroit, who has played well here, they'll play the Yankees over the weekend. Mets are in Tampa, for those who care. The only other big series of note, and that's probably going to be a Sunday night, just looking at it, Braves at Dodgers. That is your heavyweight series out of all. San Diego at Arizona, who's stumbling, fumbling, and bumbling. That's all you really have. Seattle at Houston. Let's see if Houston can get on track. I know they won the 2 games over the weekend in Mexico, but they lost there last night. But yeah, not really sexy matchups. Texas at Kansas City. I know Texas is in right now trailing first place because the Mariners are in first place. So a little maybe World Series hangover with them. Playing against the Royals, who have been pretty good here to start. That is your Major League Baseball. And I'll wrap up with the first leg of the Triple Crown, the running of the Roses in Lexington, where the 150th. So yeah, this one has a bit of not only of historic, but a nice number there. The Kentucky Derby, the 150th version of it. And listen, I could get on my soapbox and talk about how horse racing is archaic, how with everything that's happened here over the last few years, and I know this has been going on well before that, but in the news with a lot of these horses having to be put out the pasture, and I kind of hate to use that term because I've used that term when it comes to teams and who are not making the playoffs, who are going to have long seasons, put them out the pasture or out to sea, etc. But for the sport, which, let's face it, it is prehistoric, it is archaic, it's a 20th century sport, and who knows how much more legs, I hate to use that term, but the only reason why I think this sport will go nowhere, and as long as I'm alive on this planet Earth, is one word, and that's the G word, gambling. That's the only reason why horse racing is not going to go anywhere, and especially this time of year where you got the first leg 2 weeks from now down in Pimlico, you'll have the Preakness, and then 3 weeks after that, you'll have the Belmont Stakes, and I actually have a vlog in the works when it comes to the Belmont, and pretty much this whole Triple Crown and horse racing, so you want to stay tuned for that on my YouTube channel. That's not going to come until next month, but still keep that on your radar for the horse racing fan or for the sports fan in your life, so put that in your mental Rolodex. But the only time I bring up horse racing is over the course of these next 6 weeks, and not that I'm a big-time aficionado or an expert for that matter. I can only go by what I see, and as we take a look at it, the horses that are the favorites coming out of the gate are Fierceness at 5-2. That's a great name, by the way. Then you have Sierra Leone at 3-1. Catching Freedom is 8-1, Forever Young 10-1, and then Just a Touch, also at 10-1. I like that name too. Those 5 horses you would think are going to be in the running for a shot to either place in win, place, or shall for the top 3. As far as at the bottom of the barrel, you have at 50-1, Grand Mo the First, Society Man, and West Saratoga at 50-1. And remember, you've had a horse. I got to think about that. I didn't do some homework, but you did have a horse in recent vintage. I think it was last year or the year before. That was 30-1. Maybe been last year, now that I think about it. But you had a horse that was 30-1 win the Derby and then skip the Preakness. Why do they do that is beyond me. And I can answer that one, and I don't even have to be a horse racing expert to explain this one. The reason why that horse, I'm going to look that up now. The reason why that horse didn't race in the Preakness is because they knew that they didn't want to have that horse exposed in the Preakness where it was going to be up the track probably in 7th or 8th place. And as we know, you're going to have the 20 horses full bloom here on Saturday. And you're going to get a fraction of that for the Preakness, maybe even half of that. You may get 12 tops. You're not going to have the full 20 in the next race. Now, if you're going to have a Triple Crown threat, you may have 14, 16. You're not going to have the full 20 there at the Belmont. But the reason why that horse did not make it to the Preakness and was saving it for the Belmont was to see whether or not they'll be primed and ready to go because, A, the proximity of the 2 weeks, horses are going to race and probably do as well in that next race. But more so, to me, is to expose the horse and make it look bad here just 2 weeks after the fact. And I don't want to hear this nonsense. Oh, well, that's now a mile. And I believe I should know this. I believe the Belmont is 1.75 miles, where the Preakness is a little bit less than that. So because it's a longer race than the Kentucky Derby, they didn't want to put the horse out there to be embarrassed or whatever. That's my thinking, and not because, we don't want to race it just 2 weeks later because the horse needs rest. Nonsense. That is a big crock of you-know-what. So, and let me look at that, see if I can look that up now. Who was the horse that won last year? So for the Derby, let's see, and you want to have a horse similar to the NCAA tournament. You want to have a horse who is not a huge underdog, but maybe a 10-1 horse or a horse that you know can win and maybe not is heavily favored, but is favored, and therefore have a shot to win the Preakness. And then everybody knows if that horse wins the first 2 legs of the Triple Crown, you want to have a Triple Crown threat going into the Belmont because you're going to have easily 100,000 plus out at Belmont. It's going to be a spectacle. It's going to be highly watched, anticipated, etc. Because whomever wins the Derby, if they do not win the Preakness, it's an afterthought. Nobody's going to care. So for Kentucky Derby winners. So for the horse that's going to win here, you want to make sure that the horse is a good horse and a horse that's a favorite and a horse that's going to be able to, was it Mage last year or was it Rich Strike? I think it was Rich Strike. Let me look at that real quick. What was Rich Strike's? I think it was Rich Strike off the top of my head to win the Kentucky Derby. As I'm doing this here, and my apologies, people, for doing this on the fly. I'm sure you hear the keyboard ticking in the background. Rich Strike was 80-1. He was a long shot. So therefore, you knew you were going to see him next week or the following race at the Preakness. And then I believe Rich Strike in the Belmont Stakes, I think he was 6th. And I won't look that up right now, but he certainly wasn't one of the top 3 horses. Obviously, he didn't win the Belmont Stakes. I believe he was 6th. He may have been as high as 4th, but even then, because he had the 5-week layoff for him to gear up for that race, so that comes with an asterisk. So let's see what happens. I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head who is going to be the horse that's going to win this thing. Obviously, you're going to look at those top 5. I don't know if those 20-1 horses, the Dornox, the Mystique, Dan, Just Steel, Anna Marie, do they have a shot? Track Phantom, I kind of like that name of a horse. Stronghold, who knows? But we'll see. The best 2 minutes in the world of sports, the Kentucky Derby. I'll be on top of that. We'll review that on Monday. And other than that, that's all I got. Do I get into Ryan Garcia being tested positive for steroid performance-enhancing drugs in that fight with Devin Haney? I knew that they fought. I didn't talk about it. But that is a black eye on Garcia. And he even said afterwards that I didn't even know where to buy steroids or take steroids. Hey, if your trainer's going to give you something, and he says he doesn't even take supplements. So if he's not taking supplements, then what the hell did his trainer or his people give him? Maybe they try to slip it under the rug. Maybe it was a thing where they didn't see it on the list, or maybe they thought that they wouldn't come up. Who knows? But that Garcia, who lost a couple of years ago to Gervonta Davis, a guy who was rising in the sport, now gets just bad look for him. Who knows what's going to happen with that? I don't know if he got a belt there in that fight with Haney. I'm sure there'll be a rematch down the road, but who knows? But that just goes to show you how far boxing is off the map when it comes to the sports consciousness and landscape. And then I know De La Hoya got into a scuffle with Canelo. I mean, really? They're not fighting one another. Who cares? But that's what you got in sports. Golf in a couple of weeks, like I mentioned with the PGA. End of the month, the Indianapolis 500, as sports continues to be at its peak here with the NBA, NHL playoffs, as well as what's happening in baseball. You know I got you covered, so thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, like I mentioned at the top, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Also, Apple, Spotify, all the podcast platforms that are out there, just to increase the visibility of this podcast with all the others that are out there. Hit me up. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. Again, on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just the number, or the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. Because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say. Sports, every fiber of my being, this is what I love to do. Remember, I got to reemphasize it every time. This is my full-time job, people. I'm trying to make a living doing this. As you well know, whether you're one of my day ones or this is your first day, I hope you keep coming back, because where else, what other podcasts are you going to find sports, horse racing, hockey, baseball, basketball, even football? I know there's no football, boxing, MMA in one podcast. Where? With nothing but passion, fire, fury, energy, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, directed, in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.